So Marty, your life's work has been around leadership and issues around leadership, and so I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your life and how it ties into this whole leadership idea.
I wish I could figure that out. It's something I've actually thought about in my dotage. You know, as what probably happens to a lot of people in their dotage, is they begin to try to make sense out of the journey. You know, and there are clearly some building blocks, starting out in politics, and really being in politics and being in elective office when I was half-baked at best, so it really had a huge impact on me. And then going into journalism, which gave me some skills of standing back and watching and observing and trying to be outside of my own head and see what's going on. But probably, if I were to be brutally honest, it's probably what happened between the politics career and the journalism career that had as much impact on me as anything. And I blew up my political career and I blew up my marriage all within a couple of years of each other, and not unrelated to the two. And I think that was a huge turning point for me, because it gave me a sense of my own agency. You know, this was my mess, and I had to clean it up, and I couldn't blame anybody else. And I think that had as much of an impact on me as anything in terms of thinking about what leadership is involved. It's about taking responsibility and having a sense of your own agency, and not blaming the world for your problems. From there, it's kind of mechanical. I met Ron Heifetz. He comes from a background of music. He was a world-class cellist and a doctor, a psychiatrist. And we began to talk, and we realized that his training in psychiatry and music and my background as a lawyer, politics, and journalism were, instead of being clashing, were actually quite complementary. And the more that we talked, the more that we began to think about how we could combine our own very different experience and training into something that might be useful to other people.
It's an amazing story. And what I love the most about the story is you have the ability to go from the internal heart to the external political, to the very thoughtful, to the very analytical. It's just you're an amazing person, Marty.
No, that's not true. But it does. There's a point that you made there, which I think is quite connected, and it's something that I find in working with people around leadership challenges a lot, and that is that having a wide toolkit, being able to be different in different situations, being able to adapt your own preferences, your own preferred style, your own preferred way of being in the world, to a new situation which requires you to do something different. I think that's really important. You know, lawyers and journalists and politicians all are trained to be very respectful of being an inch deep and a mile wide. You know, whereas you know, you and I both played around in academic institutions where what is valued is being an inch wide and a mile deep.
Exactly.
Right? And to learn to be able to be comfortable being an inch deep and a mile wide means that you can step in, you can intervene in lots and lots of different situations.
Exactly.
When anybody says to me, "Hey, Marty, that's the way I am, you have to take me the way I am," I think that is so lazy. You know, I don't know if we're allowed to say bullshit on this tip, but
Absolutely.
I think that's really bullshit. You know, because to me, what they're really saying when they say that is, this is the way I prefer to be. But we are enormously capable of lots and lots of different ways of being. It's not a question of capacity, it's a question of will. And if you can expand your toolkit, if you can deploy yourself in different ways depending on what the situation is, then you can step into a wider range of situations and step in a way that's going to be effective, rather than saying, "Hey, well, that's the way I am, so it didn't work. Well, that's somebody else's fault."
And it's that generativity that is so interesting about your work, because I think that you personally are an extremely generative person. You're always growing and expanding and thinking, and the model that you have does the same thing. And I think that lots of people stay very stuck in their own, they make excuses. And the new research we have, the new brain research, everything they're finding out about the brain, everything they're finding out about psychology seems like you knew this 20 years ago before researchers highlighted it to the public, like you had some internal secret about generativity.
Well, one of the most formative experiences of my life was being a member of the Massachusetts legislature when I was very young. In a body, like a legislative body, you've got all these different kinds of people. And you realize very quickly on the first day that you can't accomplish anything for, quote, your people unless you play with some people that you were sent up there to stamp out, right? You know? And so you all of a sudden you have to begin, instead of saying, oh, he's a jerk and she's a jerk and I will never deal with them. You can't rule anybody out because you need 51% of the votes, you know, in order to make anything happen. So it means you can't create permanent enemies. You always have to be open, you have to understand what's driving people. And so I think this quality of empathy, which I think is really important in leadership, is essential, is something that I learned very early on in politics, of all places.
It's very interesting.
In the middle of a presidential election doesn't feel that way sometimes.
Or that politicians have that insight today, or that politicians have that insight today. And how.
Well, I think one of the things, you know, we're taping this in the middle of, you know, what in our lifetime is one of the craziest presidential elections we've ever seen. But one of the things that seems important to me is that elections have nothing to do with leadership. Elections are about winning, right? It's a competition, it's a game. It's an important game, and the stakes are high, but it's a game. Governing is completely different, you know, and the hope is that whoever gets elected will be able to understand what is driving people who disagree with him or her enough to be able to work with them, and to be able to see where the common ground is, to be able to see how to motivate them. Because the way you motivate people is going to be different. Some people are going to be motivated by logic, some people are going to be motivated by yelling, some people are going to be motivated by fear, some people are going to be motivated by the threat of punishment, some people are going to be inspired. You know, all those things are relevant, and the more different tools and tactics you can employ, the more successful you can be in making progress.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you, Marty.